Well, good morning. Today is the 10th of May 2011. I'm Colonel Frank Calagaz, and this morning I'll be interviewing in Fairhope, Alabama, Lieutenant Colonel Neal G. Parker, U.S. Army, born in Decatur, Alabama on 4 December 1937. Colonel Parker served in the Army from 1960 to 1981. Saw wartime service in Vietnam with Company B of the 228th Assault Helicopter Battalion of the 1st Cav Division. Interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project in the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress. All that out of the way, Neal.
229th.
229th.
Yes, sir.
Okay, how did I get that wrong? So we've corrected it was a Company B of the 229th Assault Helicopter Battalion of the 1st Cav. Neal, let's start out just getting a little background first with your early life.
Yes.
You're born in Decatur.
Yes,
grew
sir.
up in Decatur.
That's
Tell
right.
us a little bit about that.
I graduated from Decatur High School in 1955. I guess my early fun days was preteen when we'd go out to grandmother's farm and spend the summer with my cousins and get in trouble.
So you had an extended family. How about your immediate family, mother, father?
Mom was born up in that area. My dad was born in Clay County and moved up to there. And Mom was a school teacher and Dad was a artificer in metals, a metal worker.
Uh-huh. Brothers and sisters?
I have an older brother, Jack, who's deceased now. He was 4 years older. My sister is 2 years younger than I am, Ann. She lives in Richmond, Virginia. And my baby brother, Paul, is 8 years younger than I am, and they're in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Well, how about, it seemed that from the information I had that you had a driving desire for a commission in the Navy, applied for a congressional appointment, and didn't get that, and then rolled dice. Believe me, I'll never play poker with you. And enlisted in the Navy.
Yes,
and
sir.
were able to get an appointment from the fleet.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, they sent me to Naval Academy prep school. At that time, the prep school was at Bainbridge, Maryland, up on Susquehanna River. And which basically, the prep school ran us through the senior year in high school again so that we could meet the academic requirements. And we took the test, and I passed, and we all got on the buses and went down to the Naval Academy a day before all of the civilian plebes came on board. So we were there waiting for them the following day. And 4 years later.
4 years later, after some minor accident that precluded you staying as an aviator in the Navy.
I really wanted to fly for the Navy all my life. Oh, I thought that would be the coolest thing. Didn't think about anything else. I got a piece of grass stuck in my eye playing lacrosse at the academy in my junior year. And it got a little bit infected, and they had to treat it, and I was blind in one eye for a few days. It left a tiny scar out on the edge of the pupil. And Navy says, well, if that ever happened to you, you can't fly for us. It was not in the field of vision. And the Army says, well, let's check. And they did. I went over to Fort Meade, took a flight exam, and they said, you're good to go with us. So that's what happened there.
So then you took your commission in the Army
Yes, sir.
Directly from the Academy.
Yes, sir.
And went on, I guess, first to basic course, because I guess at that time you were commissioned in some other branch.
Infantry.
You were infantry.
Yes.
You went to the boys' school at Benning. And
No, that's right. Went to the basic course in infantry and Ranger School and then Airborne School, and was assigned at Fort Bragg with the 82nd Airborne Division as a platoon leader.
And then from there, applied
Went to flight school.
flight school at Rucker.
Went to
Yes.
flight school down at Fort Rucker.
All right. So then you were infantry, and initially, I think you told me when we were talking that when you got the first call to be reassigned to the first Cav, you were actually at Fort Hood.
That's right. Prior to the 1st Cavalry Division moving the colors from Asia to Fort Benning, the unit was called the 11th Air Assault Division Test. They had brought out the retired colors of the 11th Airborne Division of World War II fame, and were using those colors for their test of air assault, troops and helicopters.
That was at Fort Benning.
Well, it was based at Fort Benning, but they spent their time out in the field, all the way from up through Georgia and South and North Carolina, and so they you can imagine, did a lot of field exercises trying to figure out the best way to do this thing, to use the helicopters. When President Johnson made the announcement that he was going to send the Air Cavalry Division to Vietnam, turned out that a significant percentage of the aviators and the troops were non-deployable. They just returned from Vietnam. A few months, not the requisite amount of time for them to be eligible to be redeployed. So the call went out. I was at Fort Hood, Texas with the 1st Armored Division at the time. Been married just a few months. And the operations officer called me in and he said, "You hand me a piece of paper," and he said, "You ought to be about 200 miles down the road now." Holy smokes. So away we went. I got to Fort Benning, signed in, went in to meet the battalion commander. He looked at my records and he said, "You don't have much helicopter time." I said, "No, sir, I'm a fixed-wing aviator. I just finished the rotor wing qualification course just a few months earlier." So I had minimum time. I had 0 time in the Huey, the UH-1, that everybody's familiar with, the Vietnam helicopter.
Well, you mainly UH-6 or the...
So I was H-21 and H-23. And so, which are the little H-13 and H-23. The little H-13 is the one that you see on the movies in MASH. And the ones I was flying at Fort Hood were about that old. So I didn't have a lot of time in helicopters. And he said, "Well, you're not rated in the Huey." I said, "That's right, sir." And boy, he turned to this other fellow who turned out later to be one of my best friends. He said, "Captain Phillips, you take care of Mrs. Parker, get her situated in a place to live." I said, "Captain Parker, you get yourself down to Fort Rucker and get checked out in the Huey." So away I went. They flew me down to Rucker. And they gave me 10 hours in a B model and signed me off for 15 hours in a D model. Now, bear in mind, I'd never sat in a D model in my life, still. So I got back to Fort Benning just in time for them to round us all up and put us on the boats and point them towards Vietnam. Went over on the boat. I left my wife very pregnant. And I remember her up there on the balcony that early morning before we got on somebody came pick me up and we went to the buses. She was up there and I thought, oh boy. And I didn't meet my son Mark until he was 10 months old. Mm. But that's how I wound up in the Cav as a replacement. And My first flight in the Huey, D model, which is the one we use for transporting troops, slick, no guns. Well, had a machine gun.
Had door guns.
Had door guns. But I would compare this to the old deuce and a half truck, you know, you haul troops in. Anyway, we got to Quinyon Harbor, which is on the East Coast, on the east end of Highway 19 in Vietnam. That runs due west all the way to Cambodia. But they said, okay, we get the ship's helicopters ready over there, and so they transported me over to one of the carriers, the old carriers that were carrying our helicopters. And the first time I ever sat in a D model Huey was to fly off an aircraft carrier of all things. And flew over to Quinyon, got a fuel tank full, and headed over to An Khê, where our base camp was being set up. So that was my first flight in a D model Huey. And I've got to tell you, as I've told many people, and I mentioned it to you the other day, on-the-job training in combat is not what you want to do.
I think you did have the benefit of some of those old warrants in the other
The younger
Oh,
ones.
the young ones.
Oh, yeah, those guys were good. 19, 20 years old, you know, and that's all. But that's all those guys did was fly.
Yeah.
And in this particular case, they flew helicopters. But I was not surprised to see that there were several other guys sort of in my situation who were fixed-wing pilots and had minimum time in helicopters, just enough to qualify, barely. And we had to learn pretty quick.
Well, how long you been in country before the this big battle that you were with in La Drang?
We got in to Quinyon about sometime in early August, as I recall, maybe late July, early August, and we're quite busy getting the base camp set up. If you can imagine that, carving a helicopter pad out of the forest, a big helicopter pad, yeah. And we were conducting little training exercises and perimeter flights during that time. And I was with an instructor pilot. All of us who needed that were with an instructor pilot, and we were taught as much as they could in that short amount of time what we should have known about air assault, which all the other guys, you know, they've been working at it for a couple of years. But then in November the 6th, it was early November, they said, okay, we're going into action. They moved us over to Pleiku, which is over the ridge and west of An Khê. And if I recall now, An Khê was about halfway between the coast and the Cambodian border. And Pleiku was about halfway from An Khê to the border. We moved, I think, 2 brigades, maybe just 1 brigade. But then we started working with the troops on reconnaissance missions and things like that. And there was a base camp of Special Forces base camp, and it had a lot of South Vietnamese troops in there. And they got into trouble, big attack, and so we went down and got that business straightened out, and it was interesting. And then on November the 6th, we had a flight of 4 coming back from one of the routine reconnaissance and patrol missions in the area. And we got a call, and this is late in the afternoon, it was almost dark. And we got a call that said some fellas are in trouble, and it's a company that is surrounded. They've suffered a lot of casualties, and the commander has said, if I don't get my casualties out of here, I don't know what I'm afraid we're going to, be overrun. So they called on the radio and said, go over there and pick those guys up, the wounded. And there was only space. They had laid out a little landing area for us, landing zone, and it could only hold 3 helicopters. And so the 4th one orbited back out of the way, and we went in. And it was like a giant swarm of green bees coming up at us.
Hmm. This unit was part of then Lieutenant Colonel Moore's unit. No, this was not. This was another unit.
Yeah. I think it was the 2nd or the 12th. 2nd Battalion, 12th Cav. So we went in, the 3 of us went in, and every helicopter got hit. We loaded by this time it was dark. They had put up, as a matter of fact, when we company commander, he said, you won't have trouble finding a landing zone. There's plenty of tracers that were just from the fight. So we were able to get in there and get those wounded back to the aid station. That was my first real serious contact. And the unit, it turned out to be North Vietnamese. It's very evident. They wore a khaki uniform with a pith helmet, a red star on the front of the pith helmet. And they knew what they were doing. And then on the 14th, the planners decided, okay, that we got to follow these guys and intercept them and take care of business. And Colonel Moore, commander of the 1st to the 7th, got the assignment. And we hauled them in, and on the lift into LZ X-ray, that was a spot on the map that they called it. On the lift into LZ X-ray, the initial lift, there wasn't much action at all. As soon as that initial lift came out, though, obviously it alerted the North Vietnamese, and here they came. All the subsequent lifts that went in under fire. And the guys that made the initial lift in, they went back and picked up another load and came back, so they made the subsequent lifts, took several lifts.
What are we doing, about a company size per lift, or?
No, it wouldn't be that. It was only 4 ships.
Oh, okay, so that's,
4 ships could get in at one
50-something.
time.
Little over, yeah.
We were, we could haul anywhere from, depending on what the troops were carrying.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
they're carrying a mortar and a base, then and a bunch of
Goes
ammunition.
down from
that's-
13
yeah.
down.
Well, we didn't carry 13. Couldn't carry 13.
Good.
We could, according to the book, we could carry 11 or 12. But the ships had been worked out real hard a couple of years before they deployed, and so some of the ships were just old and worn, and they couldn't carry the load. And the pilot got to know the ship that he was assigned to, and we didn't have a permanent assignment to a ship, only the crew chiefs had that, and gunners. But you knew if you were assigned to 3, 4, 5, oh boy, that's a sick one. So I've got to recognize that. And I might only be able to carry 6. Who knows? So we worked that out. And that was a hard 2 or 3 days. We, on subsequent missions in there, once you got the troops in, then it was making sure that they had plenty of beans and bullets and water. And every time we'd go in to resupply the fellas, we'd bring out wounded. I've got to say that at that time, the Medevac company, Dust-Off was their call sign, the Medevac Hueys were under orders not to go into a hot landing zone where the battle was going on. They wouldn't do it. That was their SOP. It's not the individuals didn't want to. It was their SOP. So we did almost 100% of the medical evacuations out of LZ X-ray, the slick assault ships. There was a lot of people.
Yeah.
We lost a lot of brothers. And I recall when we'd fly them back to the aid station in Pleiku, which was about a 20-minute flight from LZ X-ray, I seem to recall. And the aid station was set up on the south side of the runway. Good-sized runway in Pleiku. And we were encamped on the north side of the runway. And when we would fly the wounded in to the aid station, we would, on the east side of the aid station was where they received and did the triage.
Yeah.
And then the aid station tents there. I don't think they called them MASH hospitals at the time, but it's just about the same. And they were quite good. But on the
More like a battalion aid station or something
yes,
like that.
exactly what it was. But in this case, it was bigger. I'm not sure that they expected that many casualties. And I've got to say, okay, just west of the aid station, right next door, was the GR guys, grave registration. Well, they didn't register grave. Well, they were mortuary. And outside the mortuary, they did the best they could, but the bodies, I remember the bodies were stacked. Head high and about 30 feet long. And we were, it was an absolute horrible sight to see. So we realized that we're in for a toughie. The North Vietnamese know what they're doing. And it turned out it was a couple of several thousand North Vietnamese had attacked Colonel Moore's 1st and 7th
One battalion.
Battalion. And the fellows did a good job. I'm talking about our guys holding X-ray and until one morning they had just disappeared. The North Vietnamese just was gone, and so we were called up again to bring in the 2nd of the 7th Cavalry, 2nd Battalion, to relieve the 1st and bring them back to Pleiku. And that, in a nutshell, is sort of in a nutshell, the story of the X-ray as far as my participation in it. Again.
I understand at one point too that Colonel Moore had declared the LZ X-ray too hot to land, and y'all were not to use it. But you went back in anyway.
Well, several of my buddies said those guys need help. They ran over and just grabbed as much ammo over to the ammo depot in Pleiku, loaded up as much ammo as they could, and got it over there, and my friend got away with it because he said, well, LZ X-ray was officially this field here, separated from a littler field by a couple of trees. So they went in there and with the resupply, ammo resupply. And
this is pilot logic, right?
I've got to tell you, when your buddies are in trouble,
That's right. You do what you got to do.
you do what you got to do, and you bend the rigs, and you know, the guy said LZ X-ray, but he didn't say this over here. So, and they need help, and we're going to get it to them.
Right.
And I was not involved in that, but my dear friend Lee Comich initiated that. Warrant officer, super pilot, still flying, as a matter of fact. But X-ray was bad. But after the 2nd of this in to relieve the 1st, for some reason, and nobody is able to ever figure it out, the planners decided that the 7th was going to pursue, makes sense, pursue the North Vietnamese. So they were to march up to another area called LZ Albany. We don't know to this day why they wanted them to march. And they couldn't understand, the planners couldn't understand why they were making such slow progress. Well, the planners had never tried to go through miles and miles of what we call, wait a minute, but you get hung up in that stuff and just couldn't move forward at a marching pace. When I say march, I don't mean in formation, I mean in battle formation. But a pursuit formation. The poor second of the month they made contact, and it turned out, well, a lot of the guys that it was set up because it seemed that way. But LZ Albany turned out to be a worse situation than X-ray was. They had a platoon that had rushed forward a little too fast and got themselves cut off. And the folks at Albany were having a heck of a time. Now the aviators and the 229th had spent a lot of time working with the 1st to the 7th X-ray at several days and nights. And they had supported the 2nd to the 7th when they got into trouble right on the edge of LZ Albany. And they had been flying all day in support of those troops. And came back that night and trying to get some sleep. And, oh, geez, we were worn out. Just whipped. About an hour after everybody crashed, that is to say, went to bed, not crashed the helicopter. Platoon leader came in and said, okay, the guys are in trouble. We need to get some wounded out and get them some ammunition. And we were tired, but can you imagine how the guys in LZ Albany, the 2nd and 7th, they were tighter than we were. Let's put it that way. So we got dressed and cranked them up, and went into Albany at night. Again, the tracers. Our tracers were red or orange. Go out. The Vietnamese, North Vietnamese tracers were green. And you had the red and green swarms mixed, naturally. And as we approached Albany, it was it seemed that the green tracers that were headed in, that were aimed in towards Albany, into the battle, they heard us coming, and the green tracers all started doing this. Oh, we got some good ones coming here. Bear in mind it was night, and we weren't flying with lights at all. And we weren't really sure where to land. And this one soldier, brave guy, got out in the LZ, stood up with a flashlight, and got our attention. And so we flew in and landed with him. Loaded up, and kicked out all of the ammunition and loaded up the wounded, as many as we could. And bearing in mind we didn't have any stretchers or anything like that, we just unfortunately had to just stack them in there, as many as we could. And you did. And a lot of the helicopters went out of there with heavier gross weight than they thought they could fly. We brought them back to the aid station. And as I say, the Albany's casualties, friendly casualties, were greater than X-ray.
Hmm.
A lot of folks don't realize that. Well, Colonel Moore wrote a nice book,
Yeah.
which is really super after-action report. We were soldiers once and young, and it was subsequently made into a movie. So people weren't aware of LZ Albany like they are of X-ray because it got the movie and book publicity. And everybody who was involved was really, really pleased that Colonel Moore and the correspondent was with him, and I forget the guy's name. I didn't think I'd ever forget that.
The one he co-authored the book with.
Co-authored the book.
Yeah.
They put it together, and it's a super report on how things were just prior to, during X-ray, primarily during X-ray, and then subsequent to that, what the Colonel experienced. But those of us who were in both places believe that Albany was a tougher battle than X-ray. And sometime after Albany, again the North Vietnamese withdrew back, and the evidence is now, and was shortly thereafter, then that they were encamped just across the Cambodian border. Well, politics said we couldn't go over there. But anyway, we finished up the Pleiku campaign of November '65 and came back to Ankei to patch up helicopters and lick our wounds. I've got to say I was really fortunate I didn't bleed a drop. And so many guys did. And there, the Pleiku campaign, like I say, we came back and cleaned up, and the Corps of Engineers had a bath station set up with a laundry facility, and everybody went over there, and bearing in mind you didn't change clothes for 42 days.
Yeah.
So we got cleaned up and fixed up and got a new set of combat uniforms issued. And we rested for a little while, not very long. So basically that was the Pleiku campaign that I was involved in. And of course, that by the end of November, that was there. And we were just doing some routine flying around Ankei all through the holidays. I remember Bob Hope came. I missed it because I was out on a flight. But I think it was Cardinal Spellman came on Christmas Day, and went to the service that he conducted. Gee whiz, thousands of troops out there, and it was a nice break. And right after New Year's, '66, I got orders and was attached to the 2nd of the 12th Cavalry as the helicopter liaison officer. So I was on the ground. I became a grunt. Right after that, and I was with them about a month and a half, a little over, on the ground. That was interesting too. We went over this time to the east of Ankei, over the ridge. Matter of fact, it was through the Mangyang Pass, I recall, where the French had been decimated there. But we went over to what we call it the Happy Valley. I don't know what and up on the north end of Happy Valley's area is a little village called Bongsan, Bongson, Bongsan. And our LZ was on a ridge, kind of and it could only take 2 ships at a time. And that's where, we had marched on the ground and decided to, before we got to Bongsan, the battalion commander, it was getting dark and he didn't want to, and for good reason, he didn't want to proceed on foot. At night, so there was a little village, it was a deserted village. And so we pulled in there, and he set up the perimeter all around the village, outside of the village proper, and he had his headquarters set up in the village. And my radio operator, who was a pathfinder, my job and his, as two-man team, was to work the assigned helicopter company or battalion to what might be coming up, give them a order. Guide them in when they were to come pick us up or take us someplace else or whatever. Anyway, in this little village, there was a church, and it was made of talc blocks. That particular region is a big source of talcum powder. Who would know? And it's in blocks, or it's obviously a very soft rock. But this church was built of talc blocks. White's gone, obviously, but it was gone, and it was, of course, deserted. And and there was another little couple in there, and there's set up in front of one of those. And my pathfinder and I sat on the steps of the church. That night, he's laying on the top step, and I'm such. It's just and no windows. It had windows, but no glass. And wow, suddenly we started getting fire from a 50 caliber machine gun. And that thing was eating that church up. And I'm laying there, and my buddy's on the phone, and on the radio. We're telling folks back at Aviation Battalion what's going on. And I really thought that I thought that was it. But the troopers figured out what was going on real quick, and they took care of that machine gun crew, and it turned out to be a couple of kids, Viet Cong, that had slipped in close to the perimeter and fired all the bullets they had with that machine gun, and then took off. And they were run down. They were taken care of. And I've got to say, those two kids couldn't have been more than 13, 14 years old.
They were brainwashing them at an early age.
Well, yeah. And they could have been very effective. I'm not sure that there were any of our casualties in that situation, because they knew we were in a general area and they were just spraying bullets. And
50 caliber could almost collapse that church with that soft talcum.
well, if it had been any more substantial, it probably would have, but that soft talcum, it just
went straight
right
through.
Yeah. And it was noisy in there for me and the sergeant. Let's put it that way. And I have a difficult time sitting in church these days. I shouldn't laugh, but
Well, after you obviously were involved with later Lieutenant General Moore, and after the movie and all, how about your career after his tour in Vietnam?
when I left Vietnam, now let me back up a little bit. Before Vietnam, I had a Korea tour. I was in Korea and came back in 64, January 64, and then joined the Cav in the summer of 65. And having had a previous hardship, they call it hardship tour if you have to go by yourself.
Yeah.
Having had a previous hardship tour in Korea, I was one of the earliest to be replaced in the Cav. So I got to come home in around July, and I went to the career course, this time at Fort Hollywood, Maryland, which is right in the middle of Baltimore. I think it occupies 3 city blocks or something. Tiny little place. That was the intelligence center at the time.
So you branch transferred at
Yeah.
that point?
Yeah, to intelligence. And went to the career course there, and then went to the Pentagon. And I briefed the Chief of Staff of the Army at that time, General Harold Johnson, and his deputies on a regular basis. And I was then transferred to Naples, Italy, and I was in support of, commanded a military intelligence unit in support of NATO, specifically Allied Forces Southern Europe, which was commanded by Admiral Horatio Rivero. He was he's a fine guy. You would think he was 6, 7 feet tall, but he was a real short fellow. He was Puerto Rican. And he was the primary diplomat in the Mediterranean area, I've got to say. And as I say, he was a short fellow, and being a full admiral, his stripes went all the way up to his elbow. But I enjoyed working for him, with him. We were there 3 years in Naples.
Survived the drive-in in Naples.
Let me tell you, tells me you've been there. My wife got real good at driving. She handled that traffic better than I did. We were reassigned from Naples back to the United States. I went to Command Staff College at Leavenworth, and then they said, well, we're going to send you to Japan, to the office of attaché, military attaché. So we're going to send you to language school out at Monterey. No sooner did we arrive and got settled down and classes had started, they notified us. I looked around and there were 3 other guys. No, 2 other guys. There were 3 of us. Well, where are you going from here? Well, I'm going to the attaché's office in Japan. How about you? Yeah. How about you? Yeah. Wait a minute. There are not 3 slots there. And it turned out they said, well, we'll make up our minds. The people in the Pentagon who handle the orders and everything, we haven't made up our minds which one of you guys are going. And it comes down to whoever gets the best grade. And we all looked at each other and told them, that's not the way it's going to work. It's going to be tough enough here. We're not going to compete with each other. We're going to be friends. Well, I didn't get the nod, so I stayed 47 weeks. Oh, and they told me, I went in and I said, well, okay, let me change to another language. They said, no, we can't interrupt this in the middle of the course. And I said, I've got to tell you, pal, I haven't even taken the strings off my stack of books yet. I'm ready. Well, anyway, I did 47 weeks of Japanese language training in Monterey, California. And we loved Monterey. As a matter of fact, my wife had graduated from high school out there. And I passed the course despite the hardship of knowing that I was not going to use the language. And we went from there to NORAD in Colorado Springs. They asked me where I wanted to go since I couldn't go to Japan, and so I told them I wanted to go to Fort Carson, get back in the Army. But I wound up in NORAD, this time working for an Air Force general. Couldn't get back in the Army. And we spent 3 years in the cave there. NORAD, the headquarters was down at Peterson Air Force Base at Colorado Springs, but the main operations was in the mountain, deep in the.
Randolph?
No.
No. There once and over.
Name of the mountain?
Yeah.
I can't think of it either.
Yeah.
But it's right outside of Colorado Springs.
Right.
Right across the road from Fort Carson, as a matter of fact.
Right.
So I did get close to Carson, but I was still not in the Army. And from there, we went to Iran. We did our tour there. I was the advisor to the Iranian Army military intelligence chief, the advisor to the Iranian Special Forces, and the advisor to the Iranian Military Academy. But the kids got to see Santa Claus come on a camel. And we were active in Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts while we were over there. And from on my regular rotation date, at the end of it was a 2-year tour. At the end of that 2 years, we were getting on the airplane to come home, and the city at Tabriz was on fire. That's when the revolution started. The Ayatollah Khomeini had come back into Iran from France, where he had been deported,
Okay.
and that's when the revolution started. And I got the wife and kids out of there, and we were assigned to Stuttgart, Germany, to U.S. Army Europe headquarters, U.S. Forces Europe. About 45 days after we got there, I got a call that General Howes wants you to report to his office. I thought, oh, what did I do now? He was the Air Force 4-star, still not in the Army. Couldn't get back in there. So, not Howes, Heiser, General Heiser. So I reported over to his office, and the aide said, have a seat, and there were a couple other guys there. 3 other guys. There was a Signal Corps colonel, Special Forces Lieutenant Colonel, myself, I was Lieutenant Colonel by then, and a Navy Lieutenant Public Information Officer. And we wondered, what's going on? So he said, okay, go in and see the general. We went in, reported. And he says, I've got a report from Iran, from the ambassador, that we need to prepare to move the 5,000 Americans that are in Iran to evacuate them. Now, the Special Forces officer and myself had just come back from Iran, and I knew who he was. I knew him. And we looked at each other and looked back at the general and said, General, there are not 5,000 Americans in Iran for evacuation. There are 50,000. He said, I know that. I'm telling you what the ambassador said. So, sending you guys back over there to go around the country briefing on the evacuation plan. So we were, and I thought to myself, ooh, I made a lot of disparaging remarks when I was leaving Iran. And I just wonder if it's going to get caught up. But we went back and spent several weeks doing exactly that, going around talking not just to the military types, but to the a lot of civilians over there in corporate situations, people out in the oil fields and things like that. So, and we finished that up and came on back to Stuttgart, and the evacuation was successful.
Let's jump back just for a second to after your tour in Vietnam. One
Yes,
of the
sir.
things that always has come up is some of the lack of good reception that veterans got post-Vietnam. Did you experience any of that?
Sure did. We flew into Oakland. Yeah. They flew us back into Oakland. And we got off the airplane and had school buses out there to transport us over to the barracks for processing. And the school buses had looked like something that the sheriff drives, because there were bars on the windows, net mesh bars. And we asked the driver, what's this? And, well, you'll find out, buddy. So as he pulled away from the airport, headed over to the Oakland Army terminal, sure enough, the crowds were out there. And, you know, we were just, what's going on here? Spitting, throwing crap at us and yelling and how many babies did you kill yesterday and type of thing. And it was it just knocked me for a loop. What's going on? So we got back over there, and in the processing, they looked at your orders to see where you were going and setting up transportation for you. And they said, now you've got the evening off, but we don't recommend you go off post. Yeah, you know, that was a very offensive crowd out there. And the next day I flew into Dallas, Fort Worth. My wife's parents were in Killeen, Texas, at the Fort Hood area. And she had gone back to stay in the area while I was gone. But I flew into Dallas, Fort Worth there, and she met me at the airport with my son, Mark. And he was 10 months old when I met him.
That's great. That's great. Well, the good news is today the reception that soldiers returning get a different welcome.
And I've got to say, I think the reason for that is that our comrades, Vietnam veterans, had vowed that what happened to us is not going to happen again to an American GI.
Right.
And I'm just delighted at the reception of our returning veterans.
And I do understand that it took 40 years for you to receive the Distinguished Flying Cross that you earned as part of that support of the First of the Seventh.
Yes, sir. Well, what do they do? Lose paperwork, I guess. Are you surprised?
The Army moves slow. Did they ever give a reason that it took so long?
No, I was quite surprised to get the call from the Adjutant General of the state of Alabama, and I can't think of his name now. But he called and said, you know, we have this thing, I want to give it to you and present it in a proper ceremony. And I said, well, I think that I would just be delighted to have one of the guard units down here do that. And so they made the arrangements, and I went over to Mobile to the
226.
no, it was not the aviation unit. It turned out they were busy with hurricane business. Yeah. And I went over to it was the medics. And that was really, really nice for my wife and myself to go over and meet with the troops. And it was the first time she had been back in the Army in a long time, too. Matter of fact, she was in the Army longer than I was. She was an Army bred. Her dad was a career soldier, too, so. But it was really, really an honor to go over and meet those guardsmen. They had just come back, and they were getting ready to go back over to the Middle East again. So that was a real honor to do that. That was for LD X-ray.
Right. And ultimately you retired in what, 1980, I think, wasn't it?
81.
81.
Yeah, we retired out in Colorado. When we had our Colorado tour with NORAD, my buddies and I would go out fishing in the streams out there, and the skiing, and the kids enjoyed, loved it too, and so we decided to retire out there and did. We were there for 8 years, and then I wound up taking a job in New York City. Gave them 3 years, and we said, let's go back down south. So we did.
Yeah. Well, Neal, on behalf of all of us, I think I want to thank you for your service.
I want to thank you for yours, Colonel.
Well, mine was not as dramatic as yours, but you know, the fact that you lived through it and some very trying times, and thank God that the American public has taken a different attitude toward our soldiers,
Yes.
sailors, Marines, and
Absolutely.
coasties today.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.